Imagine someone you trust, kind-hearted, ethical, and always lending a helping hand, suddenly transforming into a figure capable of cruelty. Visualize that gentle neighbor or close friend in an unexpected twist of fate, crossing lines you never thought they would. This isn't a far-fetched movie plot. It's a reality documented throughout history and observed in scientific studies of human behavior. At first, it's unsettling. How can good people go bad? But deeper reflection might prompt an even more uncomfortable question. Could this happen to me as well? In this video, we dive headlong into one of the most provocative aspects of human nature: why good people sometimes do terrible things. We'll examine case studies from history, experiments in psychology, and insights from philosophy to illuminate the thin, often invisible line that separates compassion from cruelty. As we journey through these unsettling truths, be prepared to confront realities that may challenge your sense of identity and morality. By the end of our exploration, you won't just learn about chilling events or academic theories. You'll gain crucial tools to spot the very forces that push everyday individuals toward darkness. Most importantly, you'll discover how to resist and counteract them. The final insight we'll share is perhaps the most empowering of all, a realization that can shift the way you see yourself and your place in the world. So if you've ever wondered whether you, or those closest to you, could succumb to darker influences, stay with me. This conversation isn't about pointing fingers or instilling fear. It's about understanding the psychological and social underpinnings of moral collapse and how that knowledge can be harnessed as a shield against it. Because the more aware we are of the subtle, often seductive pull of negative forces, the better equipped we are to remain true to our highest values. Let's begin by tracing the roots of this disturbing phenomenon across time, shining a light on how it's been documented and often misunderstood through the ages. Throughout the ages, humanity has been both captivated and horrified by the question of evil, particularly when it erupts from the most unlikely sources. Ancient texts, such as the Greek tragedies and the sacred stories of Mesopotamia, grapple with moral corruption in characters once deemed virtuous. Even Plato explored how the human psyche could be swayed into darkness under certain pressures. These early myths and philosophical treatises serve as cautionary tales. They reveal that our moral boundaries might be far more malleable than we'd like to believe. Fast forward to more modern history, and we see these themes played out on a massive scale. Take, for example, the atrocities of World War II. The Nazi regime was comprised not just of a few inherently sinister minds, but also countless ordinary citizens who participated or stood by while horrors unfolded. This widespread complicity forced philosophers and psychologists to consider how otherwise decent individuals could be swept into acts of evil. Thinkers like Hannah Arendt famously coined the term the banality of evil to describe how everyday people can become instruments of destruction simply by performing their assigned roles without questioning the moral implications. The work of social psychologist Stanley Milgram in the 1960s added a scientific layer to this narrative. In his now infamous obedience experiments, participants administered what they believed to be painful electric shocks to strangers, simply because an authority figure told them to do so. The alarming takeaway? Human beings can be surprisingly willing to inflict suffering when guided by perceived legitimacy or expertise. At around the same time, Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment offered a stark illustration of how swiftly people adapt to roles of power or submission. In a matter of days, normal students plunged into abusive behaviors and internalized prisoner mentalities, demonstrating just how powerfully context can override our moral compass. But why do these unsettling revelations continue to resonate? It's because they echo a universal truth. No individual is entirely immune to pressures of authority, conformity, or situational factors. Philosophical traditions, including those of Confucianism and the Hindu concept of adharma, likewise point to the fragility of moral order within society. Both ancient and modern wisdom teach us that the boundaries between good and evil can blur when circumstances, group psychology, or personal insecurities take hold. Yet hidden within these grim historical lessons is a call to vigilance and hope. If ordinary people can be swayed toward cruelty, perhaps the same social mechanisms can also guide us toward acts of profound empathy and heroism. As we move forward, let's shine a light on the specific psychological underpinnings that trigger this moral collapse and explore how each of us can guard against them, both in grand historical moments and in the subtler situations of everyday life. Have you ever wondered how a seemingly upright person can slowly drift into destructive behavior without even noticing the shift? The answer often lies in a set of powerful psychological mechanisms that operate beneath the surface of our everyday lives. At their core, these mechanisms push, pull, and sometimes shove us toward actions we might otherwise condemn. By exploring them, we can begin to see how subtle influences can lead even the well-intentioned among us astray, and, crucially, how to guard against them. One significant factor is authority. As Milgram's experiments demonstrated, people tend to follow orders from those they perceive as legitimate leaders or experts, even when those orders clash with their personal, moral compass. Why? Because obeying authority often feels safe and socially approved. Our culture teaches us to respect law, hierarchy, and expert opinions, so refusing a command from someone in a position of power can feel like challenging an entire system. Yet it's precisely this ingrained respect that can make us vulnerable. If the authority figure or institution is corrupt, our automatic compliance can lead us to commit acts we'd never imagined doing on our own. Another layer is conformity. Humans are social creatures, wired to seek belonging and acceptance within a group. This survival instinct can become a moral trap when group norms steer us toward harmful behavior. Picture a workplace culture where demeaning co-workers is normalized, or a social circle that mocks certain communities. Being the one person to speak out is intimidating. Risks can include ostracism, conflict, or even losing your job. Over time, remaining silent or going along to get along can erode personal ethics. In this way, seemingly small acts of compliance accumulate until a once kind individual finds themselves complicit in cruelty or neglect. Dehumanization is another powerful tool in the slide toward wrongdoing. When we label others as subhuman, outsiders, or the enemy, it becomes far easier to rationalize harming them. This process can begin subtly. Maybe you use a slur in jest, or nod along when friends describe a certain group as lazy or dangerous. Each time you fail to challenge such language, the mental distance between us and them widens. From history's darkest chapters to modern-day social media spats, dehumanizing language greases the wheels of conflict, paving the way for acts that would otherwise violate our moral code. Psychologist Albert Bandura added another concept to the mix: moral disengagement. It's the internal trickery that allows us to commit or condone harmful actions while sidestepping guilt. For example, a person might claim they're just following orders, or that everyone else is doing it. These justifications detach us from the ethical weight of our behavior. Over time, each rationalization chips away at empathy and personal accountability, enabling progressively worse decisions. Finally, there's a quieter but equally potent factor: incrementalism. People rarely jump from small misdeeds directly to catastrophic acts. Instead, each questionable choice is just a little more morally gray than the last. Each time we cross a line and face no immediate consequences, we become more comfortable, with pushing boundaries. Before we know it, the line between right and wrong is blurred, and previously unthinkable actions start to feel oddly permissible. Taken together, these mechanisms, authority, conformity, dehumanization, moral disengagement, and incrementalism, form a tangled web of social and psychological pressures. They don't simply turn good people bad overnight. Rather, they create a context where inch by inch, slip by slip, an ordinary individual can be molded into a participant, or even an instigator, of harm. Recognizing how these forces operate is the first step in resisting them. In the next section, we'll delve deeper, exploring real-world examples and additional nuances that make this descent into darkness both alarmingly common and dangerously easy. When we talk about people drifting into harmful or even monstrous behavior, it's easy to picture an abrupt transformation, a single moment when someone crosses the line and never looks back. But in reality, moral collapse often involves a winding path peppered with subtle justifications and overlooked warning signs. If left unchecked, these smaller compromises can snowball into actions that shock not just the world, but the perpetrator themselves. In many cases, individuals end up asking, "How did I get here?" long after it's too late to turn back. One element that complicates this transformation is the myth of absolute immunity, the belief that I could never do something like that. This misconception can be dangerously reassuring because it blinds us to the very possibility of moral missteps. In truth, countless historical episodes, from genocides to systemic oppression, reveal that ordinary, everyday people sometimes commit the most heinous acts when placed in the wrong environment at the wrong time. Labeling perpetrators as monsters from the outset allows us to sidestep an uncomfortable reality. Under extreme conditions or prolonged psychological pressure, our own moral anchors can loosen. Another subtle factor is group anonymity, which fosters a kind of disinhibition. When a crowd shares responsibility, each member feels less personally accountable. Social media pile-ons are a familiar example. Decent people can devolve into trolls, hurling insults they'd never say face to face. The anonymity of a screen diffuses the sense of individual responsibility. In more severe contexts, like violent mobs or paramilitary groups, this effect can escalate sharply, allowing group members to enact brutalities they'd never commit as isolated individuals. Then there's the diffusion of responsibility, closely tied to group anonymity. When wrongdoing is spread among many participants, like foot soldiers following orders or corporate employees signing off on questionable deals, everyone feels, "It's not really my fault." Such a mindset can transform an entire system into a moral vacuum where no single person steps up to stop the spiral. Philip Zimbardo's work reveals a dire warning. Without vigilant individual accountability, even well-established institutions can become breeding grounds for corruption. A different layer emerges in cultural myths and symbols. Propaganda often leverages archetypal images, heroes versus villains, sacred versus profane, to rally individuals behind causes that might otherwise spark ethical doubt. When a cause is wrapped in patriotic or spiritual language, questioning it can feel like betraying one's group or faith. This fervor can obscure the moral line between loyalty and fanaticism, making it easier to justify actions that harm others. There's also moral licensing, a subtle process where doing something good can paradoxically free a person to do something bad later. For instance, someone who donates to charity might feel they've earned a moral pass, rationalizing other questionable behaviors because in their mind, they've already proven their virtue. This mindset can lull us into complacency, overlooking the fact that each new decision demands its own ethical scrutiny. Lastly, Consider the illusion of control, the assumption that we can flirt with risky behavior without getting in too deep. A person might agree to a small, ethically ambiguous task, confident they'll draw the line if things escalate. But moral boundaries once crossed are notoriously difficult to re-establish. Each concession invites the next, and soon the line between right and wrong blurs into a dim memory. Altogether, these hidden dynamics create a tapestry where moral failure doesn't come in a single, dramatic flourish, but rather through countless micro-choices that gradually erode conscience. Recognizing these patterns, even before they fully emerge, is our strongest defense. In the next segment, we'll shift from theory to practice, outlining tangible strategies that empower us to safeguard our moral integrity and, in turn, help keep the broader social fabric intact. So, how do we guard ourselves and those around us against the slow slide into actions we'd later regret? The first and most essential step is self-awareness. Take time to reflect on your daily choices, especially the small ones, and ask, am I bending my principles even slightly to go along with the crowd or to please someone in authority? Journaling or setting aside a few minutes of quiet contemplation each day can help pinpoint moments when your decisions clashed with your deeper values. A second strategy is creating a personal moral compass, a clear set of principles you won't compromise on. It might feel extreme, but writing these down can be powerful. Think of them as guiding statements such as, I will not dehumanize others, or I will speak up when I see bullying. By firmly defining your moral non-negotiables, you give yourself a mental safety net to catch you before slipping into ambiguous territory. Next, develop a habit of questioning authority and groupthink. This doesn't mean rebelling against every request from your boss or every norm in your social circle. It does mean asking critical questions. Who benefits from this action? Could this harm someone? And would I do this if I were acting alone? If the answers feel uncomfortable, it might be time to reconsider your involvement. Speaking up isn't always easy, but even small acts, voicing a doubt in a meeting or politely challenging a friend's hurtful joke, can make a difference. Seek out diverse perspectives as well. When you regularly engage with people who have different cultural backgrounds or worldviews, you're less likely to dehumanize or stereotype. This not only broadens your empathy, but also serves as a reality check against blind spots you might not know you have. Social media algorithms can insulate us in echo chambers, so actively following varied thinkers and communities can challenge you to see beyond familiar viewpoints. Another invaluable tool is establishing moral checkpoints in environments prone to ethical erosion. If you're in a setting where questionable practices occur, like a highly competitive workplace, team up with a trusted colleague to periodically assess the ethical climate. A brief, regular conversation. How are we handling disagreements? Are we sidelining anyone unfairly? Can help you spot issues before they fester. Lastly, cultivate courage through incremental actions. Just as wrongdoing often happens in small steps, moral courage is built bit by bit. Start with low-risk scenarios. For example, if a family member makes a demeaning remark, gently correct them rather than letting it slide. Each time you stand up for kindness or fairness, you reinforce your integrity and become more prepared to handle bigger tests when they arise. By weaving these practices into your daily life, you don't just protect yourself from veering off course, you become an ally for others who might be teetering on the edge. In a world where harmful influences can creep in quietly, each deliberate act of integrity sends a strong, steady signal that goodness is both possible and worth defending. As we come to the end of this exploration, it's crucial to remember that the divide between good people and bad people isn't always as wide as we'd like to believe. History, psychology, and countless personal stories reveal that under certain pressures, authority, groupthink, or the subtle lure of moral compromise, even the kindest among us can be led astray. Yet recognizing our shared vulnerability isn't a cause for hopelessness. It's a call to vigilance and empathy. Throughout our journey, we've seen how individuals can slip into darkness through small, almost imperceptible steps. This creeping danger serves as a reminder that we all have an inner moral compass that needs regular calibration. By prioritizing self-awareness, questioning harmful norms, and standing firm on our values, even in the face of social or professional risks, we create a buffer against the forces that seek to erode our integrity. Every time we refuse to dehumanize someone or speak up for fairness in our circles, we strengthen that buffer. But resisting moral decay isn't simply about protecting ourselves. It's also about lighting a path for those around us. When we model moral courage, be it in classrooms, offices, or online communities, we encourage others to do the same. A single act of integrity can ripple outward, inspiring people who witness it to reflect on their own choices. In this sense, safeguarding our conscience isn't an isolated endeavor. It's an act of collective responsibility. Ultimately, the Lucifer effect highlights a sobering truth. None of us is beyond the reach of corruption. Yet at the same time, it offers a hopeful counterpoint. We can just as readily choose empathy, compassion, and moral courage. Whether in epic historical moments or the quieter everyday dramas of our lives, the power to stand for what's right dwells within each of us. The question now is how we'll use that power. Will we remain passive observers of our environments, or will we step forward, resolute in both humility and conviction? This parting question is an invitation to reflect on your own life. Where might you be at risk of subtle moral compromise? Where can you take even a small stand for integrity? The answers lie in the choices you make today and tomorrow and every day thereafter. Let them guide you toward the better angels of your nature.